welcome to the JTM Community Podcast, where we are building a community that you can bank on. I'm your host, Jason Melvin. If you are watching this, you already know who our guest is, as he's appeared on the podcast a few times before. Today, we will be a 4-part series. We'll get into that here in just a moment. Of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at j-tm.community. You can also just add a /podcast to that. If you're looking for podcast specific info, the podcasts are also there. If you're looking for where to find us on social media, top right hand side of the website, the easiest thing that you can do for your convenience is join the Facebook group. You'll get daily notifications there. Mondays is when a new poll goes live for voting for upcoming topics and episodes, as well as when you get notified that a new episode is available, which is every Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Without further ado, we will dive into it. So the 4 topics that we will be discussing, the first one will be why do we have a fascination with the supernatural? The second will be thanks and giving. The third will be when words and actions do and don't align. And then the fourth is when you feel like you have a flat tire, what's your donut? So these are all kind of holiday inspired, decided by you all. You can see a little bit of Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, New Year ideologies within there. Without further ado, my friend of the podcast, again, previous guest. So if you enjoy him, Mason Comstock, check out those previous episodes. So let's dive into part 4. So part 4 is the idea of when you, and I'll explain this a little bit for people tuning in because you might not know what this means, but we'll get into that in a second. So the idea is in part 4, when you have a flat tire, what's your donut? What does that mean to you? And potentially literally. So anyone who might not be familiar with a tire and changing a tire, what that means.
Yeah, so a really interesting topic. And so 2 things. I want to take it literally first in changing a tire, right? So actually, I knew a person who, this was through social media, and it was an experiment of mine for a while, of trying to put a positive spin to everybody's story that was posting negative stuff, because so many people would always post negative things. And I know this girl, and she was like, wow, somebody like literally stole a tire off of my car, like legit stole a tire off her car, right? And had to put, her spare on and then drive it. And so I was like, well, hopefully, at least now you can have the right kind of tires for the weather, or, at least you're going to get a fresh set of tires now and you don't have to worry about potentially getting in an accident. The whole point of those types of mentalities is putting a positive spin about all the negative stuff that happens to us. So many bad things happen to us. And if in life in general, like there's always struggles or little issues that crop up that we have to deal with. And if you're able to kind of switch your mentality for those, you're going to enjoy your life a lot better. And part of that then becomes enjoying the journey to be the better person, right? So you mentioned in part 3, right at the end there, of the journey, not the destination, but the journey. So if you think about like that person that's climbing a really difficult mountain, I'm going to peak, Mount Everest. If that's your whole goal and you don't enjoy the time that you train for it, that the people that are doing it with you, the journey up the mountain, if it's all just misery and hardship for you, the getting to the top, you're going to be like, wow, this is very underwhelming. And like,
well, it has no value.
Yeah, doesn't have the value. Really, the value comes for us as humans, I believe, is out of the journey. So that's why I like having that positive attitude as your donut. Like you can always put that new spin on life and that new thing, new mentality. Even if it's something bad that happens, you can say, oh, that bad thing happened. Here's how I can do things differently to maybe avoid those kinds of habits and avoid those potholes in the future so that my tire doesn't pop. That to me is like the metaphoric donut, right? So that is the spare that you have, and really you control that. Or you can choose not to do that, and you're gonna be just along for the ride of all the bad things that happen to you in life. So it's important that we take control of the things that we can, and really that's our own perspective and our own outlook on things, and not just let others do that for us, or situations, fate, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So if I'm understanding you right, the donut is the perception that you choose to have about the flat tire.
Yeah,
So
positive mental attitude.
yep, which kind of goes back to what we talked referenced in part 3 and part 2, is that narrative, right? It's the story we're going to tell ourselves in the situation we're in, and depending on what that story is, you're either going to become more resilient, you're going to learn something, there's going to be the silver linings, or you're going to have a sense of like defeated or hopeless or stuck, where I'm just in this struggle that we call life, and there's no end to this. This is just ongoing. My life is a shithole. Here's all the reasons. Versus, hey, it's hard right now, but this is what I'm understanding. This is what I'm learning, or I'm getting from it, or the opportunity that I've been provided.
Yeah, a really good thing, like mental exercise that people can do is like looking back on their past. So if you look back a year, 5 years, 10 years from where you are now, you should not be saying you're the same person, right? There should be it, like you should be growing every single day. If your day looks like that, it's just a repeat and recycle event, and like you go to work, you come home, you drink, you go to sleep, you go to work the next day, and like you're just stuck in a cycle, and you are the same person that you were a year ago.
Sure.
That's where you really should look at, oh, I need to change some stuff. I need to, pick up the newspaper and read some events, or figure out something new about the world, or listen to a new podcast and get some facts of like, oh yeah, that applies to me. How could I change and be a little bit better tomorrow than I was today?
Sure.
If you're constantly looking to be a little bit better, you'll never be satisfied with the person you are, and then you'll be hungry for that growth. You'll want to be smarter, more invested in yourself or the people that are around you. And ultimately, that is going to lead you, I believe, to a more fulfilled life, because you're going to find that you're more accepting of who you are in the moment. And it's okay to make mistakes, because you know that you can grow from those mistakes. So even if it's bad random acts that happen to you, you can grow from that.
Absolutely. I think an important distinction to make there when we're talking about the idea of growth and what are our donuts, is the growth doesn't happen in all forms in every aspect of your life. So let's say you're doing the work grind, right, just to pay the bills. That element of your life may stay the same, and you're growing in other areas, right? So I'll let me use you as an example. So if your work is consistent and your routine is consistent, and you and I are both relatively, we lean into routine. Routine, it helps us to feel more peaceful, right? At the same time, you're also not the same parent that you were even 5 months ago, right? Like your approach to that. So even though in a work way you have elements that are the same, and not that you're not a parent now or you're like this profoundly different person, that's just not true. Most people don't have like epiphany experiences, right? But you're also not that same person, right, in your approach. And I'll use you in within your marriage, that you were sharing. I think it was in part 2 or part 3, when you were talking about what your relationship looked like early on, and then the two of you learned to communicate differently, to communicate well, and what that has evolved over time and changed into, and your ability to navigate things, and essentially just be more peaceful, right? And approach things less defensively, and so on and so forth. So I think the distinction has to be weighed not in like severity or intensity of changes, but as you had said in part 3 with behaviors and words aligning, and you talked about a learner's mentality, it's those incremental victories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's not like, boom, like I'm this very different person. Again, going back to January 1st, that come January 1st, I'm going to be this profoundly different person and remarkably disciplined, when that's not a thing that I'm working towards already. Right? So how do we have that mentality? Because what it really comes down to is something that triggers a memory, to have that ideology of growth, right? Because it's really easy for us to one, get comfortable, which leads to complacency, as well as feeling stuck also. So in a moment of a flat tire, so the way I perceive that is the moment that I feel like, oh, this negative thing happened, right? The donut being the smaller version of a normal tire that gets you by until you can move on, until you can get a real tire put on, right?
Yeah, I think really it comes down to commitment and like
Okay.
adjust, but like a reason for yourself to do a thing. So if you we'll take relationships. If you really don't have a desire to work on your relationship and you like to be, I shouldn't say like, but you're so used to being in a relationship where you're constantly arguing and that's kind of like your stimulus.
Mm.
Uh, and you're used to that,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to want to change. You're not going to have a desire to change. You're going to continue to want to live that struggle, even if it's at a subconscious level and you're not really thinking through that. But that's like, I feel like a lot of people that get a divorce, they would be able to, they'd probably be able to fix a lot of their issues in their relationship. But really what you do is you get a divorce, you grow as a person in that moment when you're not with a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find a new person that you're able to apply those lessons learned. Like,
Sure.
oh, I'm not going to look for a person that shares these common things with my previous one that, drove me nuts or whatever. He like they won't talk to me the way that the previous person did.
Mm-hmm.
And then you develop a new relationship with that, like a new person. And it's like, yeah, things tend to work out better, right? Because even if we're not actively doing that intentionally, like you learn, like our brains are like reaction machines, right? We learn like, oh, that action used to drive me nuts, so I'm not gonna be with a person that does that anymore. And
Yep.
then it makes rather than just like fixing the problem with your previous person, but they like you really need to have the commitment, the
Mm-hmm.
desire to make that change. And for some people, maybe it does come down to like you actually do love your partner and they're like, hey, like this is a deal breaker, like I'm can't do this anymore. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's when you go, okay, I need to change some stuff in my life. And that's when you make the choice in order to be a better person and start learning about like what that means for you. um, that's a little bit of an extreme example, but that's there needs to be a reason why we want to change in the first place. Maybe the doctor gave you some really bad news that like, hey, your diabetes or obesity or whatever is really cutting down your life, like in your on that threshold of
Mm-hmm.
you know potentially death, and then that scares the crap out of you. So then you go, okay, I have a reason to commit now. I want to start to get healthy. Like you're not going to just make change for the sake of it. You're going to have that reason why you internalize something that motivates you through the hardship, right? That makes it so you want to do the thing, and no matter what, um, uh, like you're going to succeed at it. That is when you're going to see true growth happen for a person. It's you're right. It doesn't usually happen just happenstance, epiphany,
Yeah.
like all.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I think what's important to is that in moments of growth requires moments of discomfort. When we're in a position that the discomfort doesn't outweigh the fear of the change, we don't make them. And to use your example of a relationship and a divorce, is not all relationships can be mended to the extent that those two people could stay together, because at times that relationship or the experience of the separation or divorce is the threshold of discomfort for those people to learn, to grow, and not always both of them. Sometimes it's just one or none, because people will go through that and still not learn, still not have the discomfort to learn the lessons. That's also why statistically, once somebody has had one divorce, they're more prone to have a second. Once they've had a second, they're more prone to have a third, and so on and so forth, right? As you're establishing a mindset that this is an easily acceptable thing, with the idea of not making the appropriate changes or growth to have the endurance or the longevity, right? And sometimes that's more on the partner, and sometimes that's more on us. But honestly, we can say it's on both people, right? Because you both committed and went into the thing, right? Whether if you hadn't done the work to be ready for that, that's on you. And if they're doing things that are jeopardizing that, that's on them. So I think it's most important to acknowledge that growth only happens through discomfort. No one in the history of the human race has been completely content and wanted to be better. And I'm not saying it has to be like rock bottom discomfort. Everyone's threshold is going to be different. Some people's thresholds simply is curiosity. Hey, I know I don't know very much about that. I want to know more, right? That's some people's threshold. Other people can go through thing after thing after thing, right? And they'll keep putting the blame. Let's say somebody's jumping job to job to job to job to job, and they're just shitting on their employers, right? And some of those things may be actually true, but if you haven't done the work to know how to like socially interact, so you take a boss or a supervisor saying something that you don't agree with as them like shitting on you or a personal attack, so that's why you jump. That's a you thing, because most people in the world aren't going to always agree with everything you have to say. But to internalize that and to say, well, they're being bullies or they're discriminating or they're XYZ simply because you haven't done the work to be able to engage in a conversation that's not 100% like validating to all your thoughts and beliefs, right? And I'm not targeting any one thing. It could be any ideologies that we have, especially in America today. And I know you know this just as much as anyone else, right? Is the very premise of confirmation bias that makes us stuck, and it stifles our growth, because the very idea of that, we're not putting ourselves in positions that make us more uncomfortable, right? How does
Yeah,
somebody learn to drive? That they have to go through that discomfort of learning to drive. No one went to driver's training and was like, yeah, right? That's probably not true. There's probably people who are like, I don't give a shit what this takes. Freedom is at the end of this tunnel.
yeah. I will like one thing that you said where people learning is it like you have to have a level of discomfort.
Mhm.
Whether that is, I just want to re-emphasize that curiosity is a good one too, right? Because yeah, like you could look for growth opportunities just about it anywhere. So whether that's you're taking a shower, listening to a podcast, whether that is reading a new book or reading, like ideas can come from so many different places, but we have to give ourselves the space to do that as well. And one of my major concerns right now, and I'll be really curious how this all resolves in the next or evolves, it would be a better way, because it's not a problem that's going to get solved, but is more and more nowadays I see people not allowing them the space for growth. So what a lot of people do is they spend any sort of great time or like time that they could be thinking
Mhm.
with some sort of entertainment in their face. So whether that's watching random puppy videos or cat videos or people tripping and falling on these different memes, like entertainment is good, we all need that, But if you get stuck in, like, let's say, the social media, Instagram scrolling cycle,
Hmm.
eating us, and that's all we're doing with our time, in the blank time that we have between work, driving, like all our other life commitments,
Hmm.
then those are not moments that you're taking for growth opportunities. So like, people just need to be very cautious with how much idle time that they're wasting on the mindless entertainment that we have, uh, that is so easily accessed and prevalent today. So, like I said, I don't. It's not a bad thing. You just need everything in moderation, right? So that would be a cautionary tale for just our day and age. And like I said, very curious to see. And it's really interesting to me when you look at other countries. And I know it's a pretty hot topic right now. How, like, let's say TikTok its algorithms are absolutely different from its
Hmm.
home based country, China,
Hmm.
versus like what we see here. So
Yep.
there, it's very educational and motivating application.
Oh, it's
And here,
only educational and motivating in China. Yep.
it is, you got a lot of
Entertainment.
entertainment, right? So there's a reason for those sorts of things, and obviously it's a little bit different of a society, and how they are choosing to use their technology. But ultimately, that is going to lead to a better product on the end versus, like, maybe what we got going on if we can't control that within ourselves,
Hmm.
and, like, look for those growth and opportunities. Even if you think about, like, putting aside and just having white time or gray space, right? Like, in your mind, where do people do their best thinking? It's when you're not being distracted, when you're not, like, having to think about your work and your home life and all this other stuff. If you just give yourself some time to use your imagination and problem solve different things, you're really going to. That's where that growth and that learner's mentality is going to happen, because you're
Hmm.
going to try to apply changes that you come up with.
Yep. I mean, you highlighted something that I have had an anecdotal experience on Sunday. Is typically if I'm working out or going for a walk, whatever it is, there's something happening, right? So it could be a podcast, it could be like a workout video in tandem. If it's not those, it's music. So this past Sunday, out of an agreement that I had made with a friend, we're each wanting to like make a very specific change. So mine was more physical activity over the weekend, right? So I had made like a mileage commitment that I have to have proof with, right? Just for that additional self accountability. So had drove into town, ran some errands, and was walking around town, but I forgot to take my earbuds. So I'm walking around and it's just me and my thoughts, which I've never had a problem with. A lot of people struggle with that, but I also haven't intentionally taken the opportunity for it just to be me and my thoughts in quite a while. And it was the most peaceful hour I've had in a very, very long time. Like had some moments of like realization. It felt like I was back on the coast, walking along the ocean because just there was no traffic. It was strangely dead, but the wind was blowing and the leaves are still full of trees or the trees are still full of leaves and they're starting to fall. But the sound of the wind going through makes it sound like crashing waves. So it was a moment in time where I had forgotten the impact that would have, right? The white noise, as you had mentioned a moment ago, of things had just become so busy or so filled with work or other distractions that just the memory of hey, like this is an element that's out there that's beneficial because even under the guise of growth, right? While I would be working out, if it wasn't something, it would be like a podcast, right? And it feels like I'm filling the time to try and get more growth, not just the physical growth, but the mental acuity for that as well. Um, Goes back to what you said a moment ago when you said everything in moderation, that applies to the attempts of growth as well, because sometimes we get so focused on the change, right, that we begin to become tunnel visioned. um, in in those moments you miss the other things that are happening, which I think is a really important distinction to have. And it's not one where there's this hard and fast rule, because you only know it in the moment. So I can't say this is your red flag, this is how you know, right? As much as it is trial and error. If you're doing too much of this, if you're doing, I'm not going to say too much, if you're doing a lot of this one thing, it's worth to change it up.
So you described this experience, and like that really occurred because of chance,
Yeah.
um, and you experienced a moment of time, and it sounds like you liked the outcome of that. You liked the way it made you feel in that moment, right? Peaceful and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, now, how's the after action of that been? Are you like, oh, maybe I want to do that more often? Go take a 30-minute trail walk and not have music, not have these external things, and just be alone with my thoughts and live in the moment a little bit more. Like, have you made any sort of mental commitments for that?
Yeah, for sure. So what the aftermath of that was, it's not that I didn't know it would be helpful. I just forgot, period. So I just never thought of it more, right? Because life
Yeah.
got busy and I channeled things in other directions, because in moments of life it felt like that was more conducive to growth. It goes back to part two on Thanksgiving, right? That idea of gratitude. And I had expressed that when we are essentially overexposed to a thing, we begin to take that for granted. So that thing could be an informational or growth related podcast, for example, right? If we do that too much, it starts to lose its value or its impact over time. It'd be like your wife making you an awesome meal. She did it every day. Unless you're intentional, you're going to begin to take that for granted. That's just human nature. We do it pure and simple. Unless you're intentional to not, that's just going to happen. So through that experience, what that reminded me is that I had become complacent, right? In the other things I had become complacent. So now being intentional to have white noise. For example, I'm going to leave here uh, shortly to do some work stuff. Without getting into detail, and I had mentioned to you there was a bit of a tragedy, so I'm going to help with that. So when I drive into town, it'll probably take me 40 minutes to get there, right? I'll just be driving into town. Like, I'm not going to put on music. I'm not going to put on a podcast, right? It'll just be like me and my thoughts and traffic um, on the way into town. In the past, I would have put something on, right? And I'm not saying I never will put something on, right? Because I'm going to forget. I know that's going to be a thing, right? In the future. But right now, that moment happening on Sunday made me one aware, which gave me an opportunity to be more intentional. That same moment could have happened, and I could have also chosen not to equate that to any change, which people do that a lot. They'll have like this spur of a moment, but then it just fades away, and it'll always fade away, right? It's like motivation or joy, right? They're experiences that we have, but they only last for a brief time, for sure.
Yeah, so the reason I asked you is because that is exactly the learner's mentality that we've been discussing so much,
Mm-hmm.
where you take this experience that you have and you choose to actually apply it to your life. That is the growth that a lot of people miss. They miss those opportunities because they're like, oh yeah, this thing happened, and then, like you said, you brush it off and it fades, and then you forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're actively seeking out moments of how to improve your own mental or physical state and like be a better person passing through this universe in this moment of time, like, and that's what I mean by growth. That's why every day or each day you should look to strive to be a better version in the smallest and the largest of ways, right? So it can be an epiphany moment like you had, or it could be something small like, oh man, I forgot to get I forgot to make my cup of coffee this morning. And um, something for me, a very similar situation is I forgot my phone one day when I went to work, right? So I forgot how like accustomed I had been to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sense of relief of like not being tied to a phone all day, not feeling the need to check it, not am I missing a call? Like there's nothing I can do about it now, so I'm just going to live in the moment. And that was really refreshing, right? So those kinds of things, when people get tied up in them, you forget to take a step back and open up your aperture a little bit and see how you can be better about just a way of life for yourself. And it's going to be different for each person,
For
but
sure.
looking for those moments and figuring out like where you're fulfilled and satisfied and where your distractions have been. And it can be something like you were talking about, that person that's trying to do the hustle and like working all these different jobs, and like that's their whole focus is to make all this money. But then like really at the end of the day, like are you ever fulfilled? Are you ever satisfied? Like will you ever have enough? You just got to be careful with, like everybody has to be careful with getting tied down to the things that are almost like a false sense of fulfillment for us, you know.
Sure, absolutely. I think in both your answer and mine, we've kind of gone into the same direction, which is with this topic that when you have a flat tire, what is your donut? I think for you and I, it's approaching whatever the situation is with a growth oriented mindset of seeking the silver lining, the lessons, the growth, the message that we're supposed to get, the positivity in any situation, and not that we're able to do that flawlessly to any degree of perfection, as much as like that is the desire, as you had referenced a moment ago, that the learner's mindset of this thing happened, um, even though this thing may be a negative experience, what can I get from this? And I mean, I've had a shift in mindset over the probably the last 6 years, and then the last 3 years, even more significantly, um, ranging from the death of my mom to like some family conflicts to like work struggles to all these things. Having the understanding that if it could have been different, it would have, but it's not. So what am I supposed to learn? What am I supposed to gain? What's the purpose for me? And the tricky thing is your brain is going to find whatever it's looking for, right? So going back to that idea, if you control the narrative, look for the positive, right?
Yeah.
I know it sounds super antithetical in the thought of your mom died. Look for the positive, like the fuck, like there's not a thing. There is, right?
Celebrate life versus mourning their death, right?
Yep. And being grateful there for the experience that I've had, right? Even some of the chaos or the hurt, right? Like there's a lot of wonderful messages in there if I choose to view them. Or you can again have that the negative oriented mindset, the stuck oriented mindset, the complacency oriented mindset, and we'll just be here. And if you are happy and content in your own life, by no means am I saying should you be required to change anything. The only thing that I'm encouraging is that you be honest with you.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Thank you so much, Mace, for joining me for this long conversation, again, covering part one, which was the idea of why do you think that we're fascinated with the supernatural, into part two, which was the idea of thanks and giving, followed by part three, which is when words and actions do and don't align, and then finishing this up with part four of when you have a flat tire, what is your donut? And if
Always a pleasure, Jason.
Of course, anyone who is tuning in, if you want to touch base with me, you can do so at j-tm.community. If you want podcast specific stuff, just add a /podcast to that. If you are looking for resources both nationwide or in the Mount Pleasant, Michigan area, you can also find those on the website under community partners. And most importantly, thanks for tuning in and for being part of a community where you belong.